When Detective Daniel Rivers threw himself between the gunman and the prosecutor who destroyed his life, he expected to die protecting his enemy. He never imagined that taking a bullet for Patricia, Morgan would expose the corruption that framed him and turn his greatest adversary into his most powerful ally. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching, also like and subscribe for more stories. Daniel Rivers sat in the back of the courthouse hallway, his 7-year-old son Michael sleeping against his shoulder. The worn leather jacket Daniel wore couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes or the defeat in his posture. Once he had been Detective Daniel Rivers of the Metro Police Department. Now he was just another man fighting a system that seemed designed to crush him. 3 months ago, everything changed. Daniel had been investigating a corruption case involving city officials and dirty cops. He was close to exposing the truth when someone planted drugs in his locker at work. Within hours, he was arrested, suspended, and charged with possession and intent to distribute. The setup was perfect. His partner, Detective Marcus Webb, who Daniel had trusted like a brother, testified against him. Webb claimed he had seen Daniel acting strange, taking unexplained phone calls and meeting suspicious people. It was all lies, but Webb was convincing. The evidence is clear, the prosecutor had said during Daniel's trial. Detective Rivers abused his position and betrayed the trust of the community he swore to protect. Daniel's wife, Lisa, couldn't handle the shame and scandal. She filed for divorce and moved across the country with their daughter, Emma. She claimed she was protecting the children from their father's criminal lifestyle, but Michael, their youngest, refused to go. At 7 years old, he somehow understood that his daddy wasn't a bad man. The court allowed Michael to stay with Daniel, but only temporarily while the custody case was pending. Now Daniel worked night shifts at a warehouse, barely making enough to afford their tiny apartment. His savings were gone, spent on lawyers who ultimately couldn't prove his innocence. He was here today for the final custody hearing, knowing he would probably lose Michael too. "Daddy, are we going home after this?" Michael whispered, waking up. Daniel looked down at his son's innocent face and felt his heart breaking. "I don't know, buddy. We'll see what happens." The courtroom doors opened and people began filing in for the afternoon session. Daniel watched as his ex-wife Lisa entered with her expensive lawyer, Mr. Hamilton. She looked successful and stable in her business suit, everything Daniel no longer was. Behind them came the prosecutor from Daniel's criminal case, District Attorney Patricia Morgan. She was here as a witness to testify about Daniel's criminal character. Patricia was known for being ruthless and ambitious, someone who never lost a case. But what Daniel didn't know was that Patricia had been having her own doubts about his case. Late at night, she had been reviewing the evidence and something felt wrong. The setup was too clean, too perfect. But admitting she was wrong would destroy her career, so she stayed silent. As Daniel and Michael took their seats in the courtroom, Daniel noticed a commotion near the entrance. A large man with wild eyes and unkempt hair was arguing with the security guards. "I have every right to be here," the man shouted. "That witch destroyed my life and I want to watch her work." Daniel recognized the man as Robert Hayes, someone whose case Patricia Morgan had prosecuted 2 years ago. Robert had lost custody of his children after Patricia proved he had been drinking and driving with them in the car. The man had spent 6 months in jail and hadn't seen his kids since. The security guards were trying to calm Robert down, but Daniel could see the rage building in the man's eyes. As a former detective, Daniel recognized the signs of someone on the edge. "Sir, you need to leave the courthouse," one of the guards said firmly. Robert's face turned red with fury. "She took everything from me. My kids won't even talk to me because of what she did." Patricia Morgan entered the courtroom at that moment, briefcase in hand, completely focused on her notes for Daniel's case. She didn't even notice the disturbance behind her. That's when Daniel saw Robert's hand move to his jacket pocket. The outline of what looked like a gun was visible for just a moment before Robert covered it again. Daniel's police training kicked in immediately. He could see what was about to happen, but the security guards were still trying to reason with Robert instead of treating him as a threat. "Michael, I need you to go sit in the very back row and get down low," Daniel whispered urgently to his son. "Why, Daddy?" Michael asked, confused by his father's sudden intensity. "Just do it, buddy. Right now." Michael could hear the seriousness in his father's voice and quickly moved to the back of the courtroom. Patricia had taken her place at the prosecutor's table, Still unaware of the danger behind her, she was organizing her files, preparing to testify against Daniel, when Robert finally broke free from the security guards. Patricia Morgan. Robert screamed as he pulled out a revolver. "You destroyed my family. Now you're going to pay." The courtroom erupted in chaos. People screamed and dove under benches. The judge shouted for order while reaching for his emergency button. The security guards tried to draw their weapons, but they were too far away. Patricia turned around just in time to see Robert pointing the gun directly at her chest. Her face went white with terror as she realized what was happening. "Please," she whispered, her hands trembling. "I was just doing my job. Your job was to destroy innocent people," Robert yelled, his finger moving toward the trigger. "You never cared about the truth. You just wanted to win." Daniel didn't hesitate. Despite everything Patricia had done to him, despite how she had helped destroy his life, he couldn't watch an innocent person be murdered. Moving with the speed and precision of his police training, Daniel launched himself across the courtroom. He covered the distance in seconds just as Robert's finger tightened on the trigger. "Gun," Daniel shouted as he tackled Robert from the side. The gun went off as both men crashed into the wooden benches. The bullet, meant for Patricia's heart, instead tore through Daniel's chest as he shielded her with his body. People continued screaming as Daniel and Robert wrestled for control of the weapon. Blood was spreading across Daniel's shirt, but adrenaline kept him fighting. "Let go of me," Robert screamed, trying to point the gun at Patricia again. Daniel, despite his wound, managed to wrap his arms around Robert's gun hand. "Think about your kids," Daniel gasped through the pain. "Is this what you want them to remember about their father?" The words seemed to break through Robert's rage for a moment. His eyes filled with tears as he looked at Daniel's bleeding chest. "She took them from me," Robert sobbed. "They were all I had." "This won't bring them back," Daniel said, his voice growing weaker. "It will only make sure you never see them again." By then, the security guards had reached them. They quickly disarmed Robert and called for paramedics. Daniel collapsed on the floor, his hand pressed against his chest wound. Patricia knelt beside him, her eyes filled with shock and guilt. "Why?" she whispered. "After everything I did to you, why did you save me?" Daniel looked up at her with fading strength. "Because it was the right thing to do. Someone has to do the right thing." Daniel spent that night in the hospital fighting for his life. The bullet had missed his heart by inches but had caused significant internal bleeding. Michael sat in the waiting room with Daniel's mother, who had driven 4 hours to be there. Patricia Morgan couldn't leave the hospital. She sat in the hallway, still wearing her blood-stained suit, replaying the events over and over in her mind. "Ma'am, you should go home and change," a nurse suggested gently. "There's nothing you can do here," but Patricia couldn't move. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel throwing himself between her and the bullet. The man she had helped destroy had saved her life without hesitation. Around midnight, Daniel's doctor emerged from surgery with an update. "He's stable," Dr. Martinez announced to the small group gathered in the waiting room. "The next 24 hours will be critical." But we removed the bullet and stopped the bleeding. Patricia approached Daniel's mother, an elderly woman with kind eyes who looked nothing like the criminal family Patricia had described in court. "Mrs. Rivers, I'm Patricia Morgan," she said quietly. Daniel's mother looked at her with recognition and pain. "You're the prosecutor who put my son in jail." Patricia nodded, shame washing over her. "Yes, I came to testify against him today in the custody hearing. And instead he saved your life," Mrs. Rivers said without anger, just sadness. "That's the kind of man my son is. That's the kind of father he is." Patricia felt tears streaming down her face. I know, I think I've known for a while that I made a mistake." Mrs. Rivers studied Patricia's face. "What do you mean?" Patricia took a deep breath. "I mean, I think your son was innocent. I think I prosecuted an innocent man." The next morning, Patricia went to her office with a determination she hadn't felt in years. Instead of preparing for court cases, she pulled out every file related to Daniel Rivers' case. She spread the evidence across her desk and began examining it with fresh eyes. The planted drugs, the convenient witness testimony, the timing of the arrest, everything that had seemed to support the case against Daniel now looked suspicious. Patricia picked up her phone and called Detective Marcus Webb, Daniel's former partner who had testified against him. "Webb, this is D.A. Morgan. I need to ask you some questions about the Daniel Rivers case." There was a long pause on the other end. That case is closed, Ms. Morgan. Rivers was convicted. I know, but I'm having some concerns about the evidence. Can you walk me through how you found the drugs in his locker? Another pause. I already testified about all this. Why are you bringing it up now? Patricia could hear nervousness in Webb's voice that she had missed during the original investigation. Because an innocent man took a bullet for me yesterday, and I need to know if I sent an innocent man to jail. Look, Morgan, Rivers was dirty. Everyone knew it. He was getting too close to some important people asking the wrong questions. Patricia's heart stopped. What do you mean getting too close to important people? Webb realized his mistake immediately. I meant he was working with criminals. That's what I meant. But Patricia was already putting the pieces together. Daniel had been investigating police corruption. His arrest came right after he had requested warrant applications for several high-ranking officers. Officers who were still on the force, still holding positions of power. Webb, I'm reopening this case, Patricia said firmly. You can't do that. It will destroy careers. It will destroy the department. Patricia hung up the phone and immediately called her investigator. She had work to do. For the next 3 days, while Daniel recovered in the hospital, Patricia worked around the clock. She discovered that Detective Webb had been taking payments from the same criminal organization Daniel was investigating. The drugs planted in Daniel's locker had been taken from evidence storage by Webb himself. More shocking, Patricia found communications between Webb and several city council members who were involved in the corruption scheme. Daniel had been getting close to exposing a network that reached into the highest levels of city government. The setup had been orchestrated to discredit Daniel before he could present his evidence. Webb had volunteered to be the witness against his own partner to protect the conspiracy. Patricia also discovered that Robert Hayes, the man who had shot Daniel, had legitimate grievances. His case had been handled properly, but the system had failed to provide him with adequate support services for his addiction issues. His children had been removed not just because of his drinking, but because there were no resources to help him get clean while maintaining supervised contact with his kids. On Thursday morning, Patricia walked into Daniel's hospital room carrying a briefcase full of documents. Daniel was awake, still weak but alert. Michael was sitting beside the bed reading a book out loud to his father. Mr. Rivers, Patricia said quietly, "May I speak with you?" Daniel looked at her with surprise. He had expected never to see her again after the shooting. Michael looked up from his book. "Are you the lady my daddy saved?" Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm the lady your daddy saved." She pulled a chair up to Daniel's bedside. "Daniel, I owe you an apology that I can never adequately express. But more than that, I owe you justice." Daniel stared at her, not understanding. Patricia opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "I've spent the last 3 days investigating your case. You were innocent. You were framed by your partner and a network of corrupt officials who were afraid you would expose them." Daniel's face went white. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm going to get your conviction overturned. I'm going to get you reinstated to the police force with full back pay and benefits. And I'm going to make sure the people who did this to you go to prison." Daniel began crying, something Michael had rarely seen his father do. "But why?" Daniel asked. "Why would you help me now?" Patricia wiped away her own tears. "Because you showed me what integrity looks like. When you threw yourself in front of that bullet, you didn't think about what I had done to you. You just did what was right." She pulled out another set of documents. "There's more. I'm personally going to represent you in your custody case, free of charge. We're going to get Emma back, and we're going to make sure you never have to worry about losing your children again." 2 weeks later, Daniel walked out of the courthouse a free man with his conviction officially overturned. Patricia had presented the evidence of corruption to a federal grand jury, and 12 people had been indicted, including Detective Webb and 3 city council members. The media coverage was overwhelming. Daniel went from being a disgraced ex-cop to a hero who had exposed massive corruption while recovering from a gunshot wound suffered while protecting others. "Mr. Rivers, how do you feel about DA Morgan now?" a reporter asked during the press conference. Daniel looked at Patricia, who was standing beside him, and smiled. "Patricia Morgan is the finest lawyer I've ever known. She had the courage to admit when she was wrong, and the determination to make it right. I'm proud to call her my friend." The police department offered Daniel his old job back with a promotion to lieutenant and a full pension restoration. More importantly, Lisa had called to say that Emma wanted to come home. "Daddy," Emma cried as she ran into Daniel's arms at the airport. "I missed you so much. Mommy told me you were a hero on the news." Michael hugged both his father and sister. For the first time in months, their family was complete. Patricia watched the reunion from a distance, feeling a happiness she hadn't experienced in years. Doing the right thing, she realized, felt better than winning ever had. 6 months later, Daniel was back in uniform as a lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Division, investigating police corruption. His near-death experience had given him a deeper understanding of justice and the importance of fighting for truth. Patricia had been re-elected as district attorney on a platform of criminal justice, reform, and accountability. She had used her experience with Daniel's case to overhaul how her office handled cases involving police officers and to create better support services for people like Robert Hayes. Robert himself had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for the shooting, but Patricia had worked to get him into a rehabilitation program. She had also helped him maintain supervised contact with his children, something that had never been offered before. "You know what I learned from all this?" Patricia said to Daniel as they sat in his office reviewing a new corruption case. "What's that?" Daniel asked, looking up from the files. "I learned that justice isn't about winning cases. It's about finding the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient or embarrassing." Daniel nodded. "I learned something too. I learned that doing the right thing isn't always about the person you're helping. Sometimes it's about the person you're choosing to be." Patricia smiled. "Speaking of doing the right thing, there's something I want to discuss with you." She pulled out a business proposal. "I want to start a nonprofit organization. Legal aid for people who have been wrongly accused or who are fighting corrupt systems. People like you, who need someone to believe in them and fight for the truth." Daniel read through the proposal with growing excitement. "This could help so many people." "I want you to be my partner in this," Patricia said. "You understand the system from both sides now. You know what it's like to be both a police officer and a victim of injustice." Daniel looked at the proposal more carefully. "The Rivers Morgan Foundation for Criminal Justice Reform." "If you'll have me as a partner," Patricia said nervously. Daniel extended his hand to shake hers. "Patricia, you've already proven yourself to be the best partner I could ask for." 2 years later, the Rivers Morgan Foundation had helped exonerate 15 wrongly convicted people and had reformed several policies in the criminal justice system. Daniel had been promoted to captain, and Patricia had been appointed to the state's Criminal Justice Reform Commission. Michael, now 9, had written a school essay about his father that won a national contest. Emma, who was 12, had started a youth program to help children of incarcerated parents. But the most meaningful change was in Robert Hayes. After serving 2 years of his sentence, he had been released early for good behavior and completion of rehabilitation programs. Patricia had helped him find a job and had worked with family services to restore supervised visitation with his children. "I never thanked you properly," Robert said to Daniel during their first meeting since the shooting. "I mean, I shot you and you still found a way to help me." Daniel looked at the man who had nearly killed him and felt no anger, only sadness for the pain that had driven Robert to such desperate actions. "Robert, I understand what it feels like to lose everything. I understand what it feels like when the system fails you. But I also learned that the only way to fix a broken system is to become part of the solution." Robert nodded, tears in his eyes. "My kids, they're willing to see me now. My youngest son, he said he wants to get to know his daddy again." Patricia, who was also present for the meeting, smiled. "That's what justice really looks like, Robert. Not punishment for its own sake, but healing and restoration." On the 3rd anniversary of the shooting, Daniel, Patricia, and their families gathered at the courthouse for the dedication of a memorial garden for victims of wrongful prosecution. The garden was part of Patricia's ongoing efforts to acknowledge the harm that could be caused by an imperfect justice system. 3 years ago, I stood in this courthouse as a broken man, Daniel said during his speech at the dedication. "I had lost my career, my reputation, and nearly my family. I thought justice was something that had abandoned me." He looked at Patricia, who was sitting in the front row with her husband and their new baby daughter. "But I learned that justice isn't something that exists outside of us. Justice is something we create through our choices, through our willingness to do what's right even when it's difficult." After the ceremony, Daniel and Patricia walked through the memorial garden with their children. Michael was now 11, and had expressed interest in becoming a lawyer like Aunt Patricia. Emma was 14 and wanted to be a police detective like her father. "Do you ever regret it?" Patricia asked Daniel as they watched their children playing together. "Taking that bullet for someone who had hurt you so badly?" Daniel thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, that moment changed everything. It showed me who I wanted to be, regardless of what others had done to me." He pointed to their children, who were laughing and chasing each other around the garden. "Look at what came from that choice. Look at all the people we've been able to help because of what happened that day." Patricia nodded, understanding. "Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create the best opportunities to make a difference." "Exactly," Daniel agreed. "And sometimes the people who hurt us the most become our greatest allies in fighting for justice." As the sun set over the courthouse, Daniel reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. A single moment of choosing courage over fear, justice over revenge, had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of countless others. The bullet he had taken for Patricia hadn't just saved her life. It had saved his soul and created a legacy of justice that would continue for generations. 5 years after the shooting, Captain Daniel Rivers stood at his office window overlooking the city he had sworn to protect. The Rivers Morgan Foundation had grown into a national organization, helping hundreds of wrongfully accused people and reforming criminal justice policies across the country. Patricia Morgan had been elected Attorney General and was implementing justice reforms at the state level. Robert Hayes had regained full custody of his children and worked as a counselor for other parents struggling with addiction and legal issues. Most importantly, Daniel's family was whole and thriving. Michael, now 13, was already showing signs of his father's integrity and sense of justice. Emma, 16, had started a nonprofit to help children of wrongly convicted parents. On Daniel's desk was a letter from a young man in Texas whose father had been exonerated through the foundation's work. "Thank you for showing me that heroes are real," the letter read. "My dad is coming home next month because people like you refuse to give up on the truth." Daniel smiled as he read the letter. He thought about that moment 3 years ago when he had made the choice to throw himself between Patricia and the bullet. At the time, he had acted on instinct, driven by a simple belief that protecting others was the right thing to do. He had never imagined that single act of courage would lead to such widespread change, or that the woman whose life he saved would become his closest ally in the fight for justice. Patricia knocked on his office door and entered with a smile. "Ready for the board meeting?" Daniel nodded, gathering his files. They were meeting to discuss expanding the foundation's work into juvenile justice reform, inspired by their work with families like Robert Hayes's. "Daniel," Patricia said as they walked toward the conference room, "I have something to tell you." Daniel looked at her curiously. "I've been thinking about that day in the courtroom a lot lately. About how you saved my life without hesitation, despite everything I had done to you." She paused, her voice becoming emotional. "I realized that you didn't just save my life that day. You saved my soul. You showed me what it means to choose justice over personal gain, truth over career advancement." Daniel put a hand on her shoulder. "Patricia, we both learned something that day. We learned that justice isn't something we achieve. It's something we choose, again and again, every day." As they entered the conference room filled with lawyers, social workers, and reform advocates, Daniel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The bullet scar on his chest would always remind him of the moment his life changed direction. But more than that, it would remind him that sometimes the greatest victories come from the smallest acts of courage, and that true justice is built, one choice at a time, one person at a time, one act of integrity at a time. The hero who had taken a bullet for his enemy had discovered that sometimes our greatest enemies become our strongest allies in the fight for what's right. And that fight, Daniel knew, would continue for as long as people were willing to choose courage over fear, truth over convenience, and justice over revenge.